I loved the idea of death, which I see as the last stage of real pain. Albert Hamilton Fish, known as the Gray Man or Wisteria's werewolf, or, as some call it, the Brooklyn Vampire. Born in Washington on May 19, 1870, this white, middle-sized and not very conspicuous man is a serial killer who tortured more than 100 children inspired by today's horror cinema and then devoured their flesh. When Albert was born in Washington in 1870, his mother, Ellen, is 32, and his father, Randall Fish, 43 years older than him, is 75. Albert, who never tasted maternal love, was placed in a nursing home where orphaned children were cared for because his mother, who took care of his 6 siblings after his father's death, did not want to take care of him anymore. Since he could not adapt to the institution where he was 7 years old, his mental structure deteriorated. The institution he stayed in is an orphanage famous for disrupting the spiritual structure of the children. Albert, who stayed here until the age of 9, received all kinds of sadistic treatment, including being whipped. After a while he started enjoying these. Albert, who was sent to his mother after correcting his condition, began to experience severe headaches after being abused here as well. After his high school education, he started to travel and work in temporary jobs. As homosexual tendencies emerged in 1882, Albert became an increasingly perverted and he was going crazy. Albert, whom his mother persuaded to marry in order to put his life in order, had 6 children. Albert, who does not mistreat his children in any way, is jailed for embezzlement to take care of his children. After months of perversions in American prisons, their sexual perversions become more diverse. Later, in his confessions about this period, he explained that he was driven by a cut penis he saw in the wax exhibition and then tried to harm a mentally retarded youth. He went to brothels to whip himself and became interested in young children. Albert, who began to see the first hallucinations when his wife left him, became apparent in his interest in various perversions and his tendency towards religion. Thinking that he had seen Jesus and his angels, Albert mentioned in his interrogation that he wrapped himself on a carpet on the instructions of the Apostle John. Albert Fish, who generally chose small and vulnerable children, was bound to torture his victims, rape their victims, eat their flesh, take great pleasure in inflicting pain on his victims, and attributed all of these to his religious beliefs. It is assumed that he committed 15 murders in the 10 years until 1920. However, since these victims were mostly chosen from orphans or blacks, there is no exact information about these murders. In addition to all his psychopaths, Albert Fish also took great pleasure in inflicting pain on himself. He believed that his own sins were punished by sexual and physical torture, such as drinking his own urine, beating himself with nail sticks, and sticking needles in his groin. He also considered the children he tortured and killed as victims to God. The Gray Man constantly changed addresses, harassed hundreds of children wherever he went, and killed some. In 1924, when he sees the 6-year-old Beatrice Keel playing on a farm, after her wild feelings, Fish chases after the little girl and tries to seduce her. The girl's family noticed the situation and kicked Albert from the farm. In a later attempt, he managed to seduce 2 children playing on the street and bring them home. But when the children saw the lines and knives under the bed, they got scared and managed to escape from the house. 8-year-old Francis McDonnell asked the family that their son was reported missing overnight. The last time the family's neighbors saw the boy, they said that he was walking with a gray mustache, well-dressed, fatherly-looking old man. After a few hours of searching, the boy's dead body was found in the forest near his home. According to the autopsy, the poor boy, strangled with a garter, was sexually assaulted and tortured. Deep wounds were inflicted on his legs and abdomen. His left leg was almost severed from the knee. In her testimony to the police, the grieving mother vaguely remembers seeing the gray-haired and gray-mustache old man before. Because of these statements, he is given the nickname, Gray Man. 4-year-old Billy disappears while playing with his friends at their home. When his 3-year-old friend later finds himself on the roof of his house, he says he has avenged Billy. The testimony of the boy is ignored by the police and another serial killer is blamed. An eyewitness identifies Fish, whom he knows from the newspaper. Albert kidnapped the little boy of the house he entered to paint. Stripping naked, tying and whipping the little boy with a cloth in his mouth until it bleeds with a whip he made from his belt, Fish goes through the process of cutting the ears and nose. Little Billy, whose mouth he cut all the way to his ears, could not bear the terrible pain when his eyes were carved and he died. In his confessions, Fish, talking about the torture he inflicted on the child in a calm manner as if he was giving a recipe, says that he cut the body from one side to the other, filled his hand, foot and head with 4 sacks with stones and threw them into the nearby river. He prepared a casserole by adding onion, carrot, celery, salt and black pepper with the meat he cut from the nose, ears, face and stomach, and fried the most delicious parts in the oven. Stunned, poor mother Elizabeth Gaffney, unable to believe her son's death, wants to meet with the monster. But Albert begins to cry and refuses to meet. The mother is not convinced that Fish killed her son. Little Billy's remains are never to be found. After gaining their trust in the Budd family in 1928, Fish kidnapped their little girl Grace Budd on the pretext of taking her to her nephew's birthday party and took her to an empty house. Fish, who dismembered Grace's body, brought some of the pieces to the boarding house where he was staying, and continued his deviance without ever going out for 9 days, cooking and eating them. He roamed free for the next 6 years, but Grace Budd was persistently looking for him, a New York City detective named William King, who turned the incident into his personal crusade. Despite this, Fish managed to escape, if only he could deal with the demons within himself. In 1934 he felt compelled to send a letter to Ms. Budd, one of the sickliest letters ever written. Ultimately, King was able to locate and apprehend the letterhead of the letter paper. Albert Fish's letter read as follows. 1894 as a friend of open sea as a sailor on the ship steamer Tacoma. They were on their way from San Francisco to Hong Kong harbor when you get 2 friends to the mainland by a rebellious and very drunk became. When they returned, they saw that the ship was leaving the port. This in their famine shall take. The weight of the meat was between $2 to $6. Very poor ones among hunger jerks so great that the others starved to avoid dying in order to 12 years of age all children, as the meat they sold to butchers for their sold. You could go to any town and ask for chops, steaks, cubes. Nude of a child's body part is brought in front of you and you want the pieces predict she could. A crisis or the boy's buttocks partial, the most delicious portions and the veal cutlets sold the most expensive to have. John their very long stuck in human flesh against a fondness formed. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, aged 7 and 11. Them after his house was robbed and a closet was shut. Then he burned all his clothes. Every day he tortured and beat them so that their meat was good and soft. He first killed the 11-year-old boy because his butt was chubby and of course meatier. He cooked and ate every part of his body other than his head, bones, and intestines. Oven baked, a boiled, fried, bin and cubed made. small boy in the same things done. At that time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street. The flesh is very tasty to me that he so often told that I'm tasting my mind, I put it. On Sunday, June 3, 1928, I came to your house at 406 West 15th Street, brought cheese and strawberries. At noon, the food we ate together. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I set my mind to eat it. I said I was taking him to a party. You said yes, you can go too. Westchester him before my eyes. I predict I took an empty house. When we got there, I told him to wait outside. The dirt started collecting flowers. I pulled up and took off all my clothes. I knew that if I hadn't taken it out, they would have gotten blood on them. When everything was ready, I called him through the window. I hid in a cupboard until I got into that room. When he saw me naked, he started crying and tried to walk down the stairs. I caught him and he said he would complain to his mother. First, I robbed him completely. How he kicked, bit and nailed. His throat squeezing, I killed him, and then take it to my room. I divide the meat into small pieces. I cooked and ate. Oven cooked little butt so soft and sweet on. It took me 9 days to eat your whole body. I didn't rape her, but I could do that if I wanted to. She died a virgin. Quote. When Fish was caught, the authorities realized that he had an unimaginable heresy criminal in their hands. This man had spent his whole life in pain. Like other serial killers, Fish was a man of religion and inflicted very strange tortures on himself as punishment for his sins. The children he wounded and killed were victims to God in his mad mind. The famous New York psychiatrist, Dr. Frederick Wortham, stated that the old man had every known sexual perversion, as well as anomalies that no one has heard of until today. In the pelvic X-ray taken in the prison, 29 needles inserted into the area around his bladder were found. At his trial in 1935, the jury decided he was insane, although he still believed that he should be executed on the electric chair. After the announcement of his death sentence, this abnormal old man said, "To die in the electric chair, nor will magic be pleasure. This will be the greatest pleasure I will taste. The only pleasure I have not tasted so far." Reported, he is expressed by his children when he is judged to be a good family man. It is known that he always thinks of his children a lot, although he has not harmed his children. The only case in which his children are involved in his madness is when children stick him as a punishment when he does not know the number of fingers. They hide from him as a game rule in order to satisfy Fish masochism during a guessing game in which they play at a young age. So much so that most of the time Fish would beat himself, in particular by saying the number of fingers on a hand. The first detail that strikes the eye when detectives ask about his background after his capture was found on October 15, 1875, after the sudden death of his father in St. John, then sent to the orphanage. I terrible after the event, will start to go bad thing here has been, is also. He further stated that they were brutally whipped in the orphanage and that he witnessed things that should not be done to children in the orphanage. The authorities have a finger behind Fish's reputation. Although 2 separate experts hired by the defense had reported that Fish was insane, 4 separate specialists appointed by the prosecutor's office made a sane diagnosis for Fish. One of the expert Fish is the chief of hospitalized mental hospital after a period of treatment so that the Grace Budd murder. Dr. Charles Lambert, one of the prosecution experts, concludes that Fish is a mentally unstable psychopath after a 3-hour interview with Fish. While defense lawyer James Dempsey attacks the prosecution in this context, arguing that the issue of cannibalism is the most concrete example of Fish's madness, Dr. Charles Lambert, the indisputable dear lawyer for people's taste, and we can always meet different people in society. It could be those who add meat. Fish's own children once witnessed their father beat his naked body with a wooden spade with a nail until it was covered in blood. Once Fish spread his arms on a hill and said, "I am Jesus." They had witnessed her cry, "Fish, what I did must have been true. Otherwise wouldn't an angel have stopped me?" Just as the prophet Abraham prevented him from sacrificing his son. Albert Fish's death sentence took place on January 16, 1936, in an electric chair in Sing Sing prison. Albert Fish, who came to the world as an innocent child like everyone else, was exposed to beatings and torture at a young age without any attention from his family. He thought these were a form of interest. He embraced the idea that the price of sin would be paid through suffering. He also made others experience what was made to him. If he hadn't been beaten at home and in the orphanage, we'll never know if this old man would have a good character to match his looks.